Lately, we've been hearing a lot about countries going to war. The Russia-Ukraine war continues, the Middle East is a mess once again, and we hear about tensions in the South China Sea. Yet, most normal people are against having war. Anyone you talk to will tell you that they are against having a war. It's kind of obvious that people don't like war. But the uncomfortable truth is that some country leaders will tell you that war is not only necessary, but morally just. So the main question is, can war ever be morally justifiable? There's a concept known as just war theory that tries to explain the reasons when war might be morally justified. It's composed of 3 parts: the moral criteria before, during, and after the war. The first one is the moral criteria a country needs to meet before going to war. These are some of the main rules. The first rule is having a just cause, meaning does the war have a morally legitimate reason? Is the war in self-defense? Is it to stop a genocide or to defend human rights?
To exercise its inherent right to self-defense under international law.
Basically, is the war being done to fight against a public evil where innocent life is in danger? This one asks the question, what is this war trying to achieve? The next rule is, are the intentions right? Is the war being fought for peace or justice instead of for profit or revenge? This one answers the internal moral questions of why are we really doing this? This is because countries might claim a just cause for going to war, but their real motives might be different. It might be for revenge, profit, national prestige, regime change, disguised as humanitarian intervention. The next one is the authority that chooses to go to war legitimate? For example, is the decision to go to war made by a legitimate governing body instead of by a rogue general that's acting on impulse, a military coup, or an illegitimate rebel group? The next one is the last resort rule, and this one asks, have we really done everything we can to avoid the bloodshed? Has every peaceful option been tried? This means that diplomacy has failed. Sanctions, negotiations, international pressure didn't work. There was an honest effort to avoid violence. But it's not a checklist though, it's really about proving that violence was truly unavoidable. You didn't go to war just because trying to avoid it was gonna be hard and politically messy. You didn't say, well, the peace negotiations are gonna be very hard, so let's just go to war instead. Negotiations might be inconvenient, but not impossible. Choosing war just to avoid an inconvenience is morally wrong. You went to war as a last resort because getting peace was impossible, not because it was very hard or inconvenient. The next one is proportionality. Are the benefits of going to war higher than the harm that is going to cause? For example, how many lives will be saved versus how many lives will be lost? Will the war prevent greater suffering or create more destruction than it solves? For example, if a country invades another one to stop a terrorist group but ends up destroying entire cities, displacing millions of people, killing thousands of innocent civilians, is the cost justifiable? What if the war was meant to protect human rights, but you ended up violating more than the ones you protected? One has to ask, how many families will be torn apart? How much infrastructure like schools, hospitals, homes will be destroyed. How long is the suffering going to last? So if the outcome of going to war is worse than the problem it was meant to solve, then it fails the test of proportionality. The next one is having a reasonable chance of success. What is the probability of winning the war? Starting a war that is massively violent must not be done if it's unlikely to secure the just cause. If you start a war that's going to cost thousands of lives and you know you're not going to win, all you're doing is unleashing destruction, death, and suffering just for nothing. You have to ask yourself, will the war accomplish what it claims, or will it just end in needless bloodshed, leaving the situation even worse? For example, if a small country launches a war against a stronger country with no clear plan, no allies or chance of winning, it's not bravery but recklessness. Even if you launch a war to stop human rights abuses, but you have no plan for securing peace, protecting civilians, or rebuilding, you might have a just cause, but it's still morally unjustified. Just having good intentions is not enough if the result is mass deaths with no hope of success. You will just have a tragedy, not triumph. Then there's the second part, the ethical moral criteria when you're involved in the war. One of the first and most basic rules is that you can only target combatants. You cannot target civilians. This is because civilians are not soldiers and are not part of the fight. Attacking schools, hospitals, residential neighborhoods is a violation of that. Another rule is proportionality. The amount of force that you use must be proportional to the military objective. You don't destroy an entire city just to eliminate one person. This is about avoiding unnecessary suffering, not just for the enemy, but for everyone caught in the crossfire. Another rule is to not use evil means. Some weapons and tactics are always wrong. This basically prohibits the use of torture, genocide, targeting religious or ethnic groups, and using biological, chemical, or nuclear weapons on civilians. These aren't considered just bad tactics, they're considered immoral, and no justification makes them right. But here's the problem. All of this sounds very good in theory, but in reality, wars can be very different. Whether by accident, poor intelligence, or on purpose, these rules are often broken. So this second criteria, known as jus in bello, is essential but also very hard to uphold. And just war theory doesn't end when the fighting stops. It also has a third part, the ethical criteria after the war. It asks the question, now that the war is over, what kind of peace will you build? The main rules include the fair treatment of prisoners. Captured soldiers and fighters must be treated humanely according to international law. No torture or revenge killings. Punishment for war crimes. Those responsible for atrocities on both sides must face justice. If you ignore the war crimes, then you risk them becoming the norm in future conflicts, because war criminals believe that they'll be able to get away with it. Reconstruction recovery. If a country was invaded and destroyed by war, there's a moral obligation to help rebuild the infrastructure, institutions, and basic services, not just walk away and leave them with all the destruction. Restoring peace and stability. The goal is not just to win the war, it's to create just and lasting peace. If you're not creating peace, you're just planting the seeds for the next war. This is like the Treaty of Versailles after World War I. This peace agreement that ended the war wasn't designed to rebuild Europe and bring lasting peace. Instead, it was seen as punishment to Germany. Many historians believe it helped cause World War II because it didn't bring lasting peace. It just hit the pause button. The treaty was seen as a punishment rather than a treaty to restore peace. So just war theory applies the issue of putting morality in war. But there's another approach to foreign policy and war that takes a completely different stance. It's not about morality, but instead it completely ignores it. It's called realpolitik. And comparing these two worldviews, just war theory versus realpolitik, shows a big conflict between morality and pure cold strategy. And that's a topic for another video, so please subscribe so you don't miss it.